Welcome, my name's Jeff Lowe and I'm from the Apple Enterprise Sales Group. We're excited to bring you a new series of online seminars all around broadcasting and video in your enterprise, showing you the latest in Apple solutions for your individual markets, whether that's sports editing, video streaming, or maybe even podcast producing. Apple brings you the very best technology, the most elegant form factors directly to your fingertips for everything from paper-thin mobility with MacBook Air and MacBook Pro to the massive performance and flexibility and expandability of the Mac Pro. We also provide server solutions like the One U Xserve that drives products like Xsense for file storage and Apple Remote Desktop for client management. Apple is the leader in video editing software worldwide, the latest being Final Cut Pro 6, which is part of Final Cut Studio 2. Now, in this online seminar series, we're going to delve into one specific application, and that's Final Cut Pro 6. Final Cut Pro is the most successful nonlinear editing tool in the history of the industry. You probably already know Final Cut Pro is fantastic for post-production and filmmaking, but you may not realize Final Cut Pro can be a world-class tool for deadline-driven news and sports editing. To show you his proven editing technique for getting your piece from camera to server via Final Cut Pro, I would like to introduce the guy who literally wrote the book on news, nonlinear editing, and sports, Mr. Joe Torelli.
Hi, I'm Joe Torelli. I'm the broadcast evangelist at Apple. And what I want to talk to you about today is Final Cut Pro and how it can be used in news and sports. My career has been based in the news environment for over 30 years. I was with NBC News for a long time, covering effectively everything that moved during the 80s, having been involved in Pope trips, president trips, disasters, terrorism in the Middle East, and so forth. And what has happened in the past couple of years is we've seen the reduction in the size of the equipment. And some of the things that I used to travel with, I'd travel with four $30,000 VTRs to be able to go to Algeria to cover TW-847 just so I could do a dissolve. And this required tremendous amounts of equipment, chartered airplanes in some cases. And what's happened is the economy and technology has brought it down to the point where I could use a MacBook Pro to do everything that I was doing back then. So what I want to do is kind of help you all understand how Final Cut Pro can help you as you improve your career and learn more things, because management in the television stations and the broadcast environment, they're starting to see that there's a great economy in what we can do with Final Cut Pro and having them deploy that at your location. So by learning Final Cut Pro, you're going to be getting some really, really good background for your career, and you're also going to be able to have a whole lot of new things you may not have ever been able to do. So what I want to try to do is to give you effectively an overview of the Macintosh, because there are some things you're going to need to know that may be slightly different than what you're used to. And we're also going to then obviously go into Final Cut Pro and learn a couple of the things about it. Now, Final Cut Pro is a very big program. There's a lot of things that can be happening in Final Cut Pro. And we're only going to need to have a small subset of that in order to be able to get your job done. So I'm going to go over the things that you're going to need to know. There are other ways to be able to learn the rest of it, but I feel that from a news point of view, there's some specifics that we're going to go through. Learning a little bit about the Macintosh is going to be essential for you to be able to edit quickly, and there are some things that you're going to need to know and things that you may need to adjust on the system that you're working on, or someone else will have to do for you, but it's best that you see it because you may see the behavior and you'll need to know how to change that. One of those is the fact that I can double-click and open up a folder just like you would on a regular computer, and let's look at the applications folder here. And then maybe I want to open up another folder and see what else is in another one here. So let's go and look at the AppleScript folder and see what's there. And one of the things that we have with the Macintosh operating system is a thing called Expose. What Expose does is it lets me effectively see each of those windows independently or take them off the screen to reveal my desktop so I can do some other things. It's a great feature to have, but unfortunately, those function keys doing that may hamper your speed in being able to edit with Final Cut Pro. What we want to do is reassign those keys to other functions. That lets us use these function keys that I'm talking about, F9, 10, 11, and 12, to be able to do important things in Final Cut, which include insert edit, overwrite edit, fit to fill, replace edit, and so forth. So what I want to do is to show you how to be able to go about finding those. What we're going to do is we're going to open up the system preferences. I'm going to click on keyboard and mouse. And we're going to go over here to keyboard shortcuts and scroll down to where it says Dock, Expose, and Dashboard. These are the assignments for F9, 10, 11, and 12. What we want to do is to reassign them. You double click and you hit Control F9. You double click and you hit Control F10. And you'll only need to do this one time. This is very important because you're going to need these 4 buttons every day when you're editing in order to be able to go quickly and to make it to your deadline. So now I've reassigned them to the control key, so that means I'm going to need to use that, but I could use the right click to make that happen. So I can either use the control key and click on it, or I can right click, but wait a minute. Here we have a mouse that appears to have only one clicker, but it really has 4 different functions that you can assign to it. There's really more, but 4 of them that you're ever going to want to use. The most important one, though, is right click. And even though you don't have a line here dividing it, software tells it to be right click. So what we want to do now in this same control panel is go over to the mouse settings, and you see where it says primary button, and on the right side it says primary button? I can change that to be secondary button. Now I have a right click. So we'll close that, and we've effectively now made our keyboard and mouse friendlier to Final Cut Pro and other things that we may be doing. So by right-clicking, it gives me a contextual menu that gives me more choices to do things. Again, these are things that are going to speed up your editing. You may walk into a room that doesn't have it already set that way, and you're wondering, where's my right click, where's my right click? Now you know where to go to be able to get that. I think it's time that we talked about the dock and launching the applications. At the bottom of the screen, we have a list of the various, a little visual icon of each of the different applications that we use often. You can reassign whatever you want. If you want to take GarageBand out, you can take it out and throw it away, iMovie. What we do want is Final Cut Pro. I have multiple places that I can launch Final Cut Pro. I can launch it from the folder up here. I can launch it from the dock. I'm going to single click on it, and that's going to do the launch. And then that's going to show up on our screen, and we're going to start working. Now that Final Cut Pro is running, what I want to do is I want to show you something that's really, really urgent. You need to do this immediately. I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to pull down from the File menu. And this is before we've captured any material, before we've done anything. We're going to create a new project, and then we're immediately going to save it. What that does is it activates the autosave in the background. And we're going to call this one Charles River. We've done a little story on Charles River and sculling, and that's what we're going to do. And I always want to put it to a place that's easy for me to find and easy for the person after me that's taken over the shift that has to re-edit it can easily find. If you're on Xsan, if you're on a server, there may be other protocols that you may have developed at your station or your facility. What I'm going to do is just for this purpose is I'm going to create it and put it on my desktop. And that activates the autosave. And autosave allows me to, in the background, save what's going on in the system in case somebody accidentally pulls the plug out of the wall. Before we get into the interface on Final Cut Pro, I think it's really imperative that you know a little bit about the different types of media that we can work with. Obviously, we can work with videotape. Videotape's been around 35 plus years or so, editing machine to machine, and in the last 15, 18 years, you would take the videotape and you transfer it over to a disk drive. We can do all that stuff, obviously, but I think it's really good for you to get an overview of what some of the tapeless media are. First, we're going to start with XDCam. So this is Sony XDCam, and what Sony XDCam is, it's effectively a 23 gig optical disc, not unlike Blu-ray, but it's the professional version of the Blu-ray. And this allows me to record both SD and HD capable from different cameras. Obviously, an SD camera is only going to record SD. But XDCam has a couple of different things that we can do with it. We're going to be using that today for our examples, but I do want you to also see what some of the other media look like. P2 is from Panasonic, and this is a RAM card. So there's no moving parts here, and this is really compelling to a lot of TV stations and organizations because the maintenance is much different. I have no moving parts. This is effectively 4 little SD cards, not unlike what you use in your digital still camera. And those 4 cards are inside, and they're striped together to give you massive bandwidth in order to record both SD or HD, and HD at a really nice picture quality, DVC Pro 100, as well as AVC Intra at 100 megabits. So another one of the formats that we have is the Firestore. And what the Firestore does differently is Firestore is actually shooting a QuickTime native movie, whereas the other 2 aren't. That means that I can mount this spinning disk drive directly into Final Cut Pro and work with it immediately when I finish recording. So that's really compelling if you have a really tight deadline and you need to get something done quickly. Whereas XDCam and P2, it's a very fast method of transfer, but it's not something that I have immediate access to. So let's get started. So we're going to take the XDCam disk and we're going to pop it into the deck. Now, one of the things that's a little different about this deck is the fact that not only can it play video in a certain mode, but it also acts effectively as a disk drive. It's really a reader. The disk drive is the optical disk that is the XDCam disk. And there's a couple settings that you can go through to be able to set that up, and in most cases that's already set up for you. What I like to get everybody to do when they're working on Final Cut Pro at the very beginning of the process is we're going to hit the Command H key. We're going to press Command H, and you're going to see over here the JT River disk. So that means that the disk has been mounted onto the desktop. And one of the things I really, really urge people to do is when you reformat the disk in the camera, it reformats it and calls it untitled. And if you've got 11 crews shooting 4 discs a day, those discs are going to come back to the station. 44 discs are going to be in there, and they're all going to be labeled untitled. I like to get everybody to rename it on the desktop at that point. Some of the different stations are going to have different rules about that, but the quick way to do it is you literally just click on it, and you click on it again, and you could say Charles River. And now, actually, you want to maybe make sure that it's spelled right. So then, I don't double-click it there. I can if I want to see what's in the contents. I don't need to. It really doesn't matter to me. But now we're going to click back over to Final Cut Pro. I can click on it in the dock, or I can hit Command-Tab to go over to Final Cut Pro. And then we're going to pull down, and we're going to say Import Sony XD-Cam. This now launches the Sony XD-Cam transfer tool. And what we're going to see is the individual thumbnails coming up of the first frame of each time that the photographer started the camera. And as that goes through, it's going to literally fill in these windows and show us the various elements that were recorded on the disk. Now, there's 2 different ways to do this. You can have it bring in a proxy behind that, behind the thumbnail. So thumbnails show up first, then the proxies come in sequentially. Or you can shut off the proxies, which I've done now. And what that does is it prevents you from having to waste any time if you're in a real hurry to get going and you just want to have everything loaded up. Or visually, you can identify the shots that you really want to have. For instance, I know I need to have that shot. Again, I may have shot it. I know that I need that one. I'm going to hold the Command key down, and I'm going to grab a couple of these, and I'm just going to grab those clips as marked. So it's literally taking the entire clip, and you're going to see a little thermometer bar going across here. 42%, 50%, and then over here in the Final Cut Pro browser, that clip's going to show up. And now the second one is going, the third one, and the fourth one. I'll go back over to Final Cut, and I'll open that up in my viewer, and I can drag through and see the sculler there as he's rowing through the Charles River. Let's go back over to the XD-Cam transfer tool. Some of the other things that Sony's added, and I'm using version 2.5 of Sony's XD-Cam transfer. What this now allows me to do is I can highlight a clip, and it allows me to rename that clip, and I can say Tight Shot River. And when that shot comes back into Final Cut Pro now, if I have chosen to take it in its entirety, it's going to come into Final Cut Pro and be called Tight Shot River. That was only made available in the last, in the last couple of months or so. Okay, so now that we have the XD-Cam thumbnails in, we're going to make a couple decisions as to how we want to work. Maybe we want to go in and just highlight everything and bring all of it in, and the way to do that is a simple Command A, lights up all of the elements, and I can hit the import button, and it's going to bring everything in from first frame to last frame. Maybe I don't want to do that. Classic example, you have a press conference. Public official is going to make a big announcement that morning. They're going to go up and stand, you're going to have the camera rolling. It may be 30 minutes, it might be 45 minutes, it might be 5. I don't want to have to bring all that in. So what I can do with the system is I can go in and say, well, show me the proxy. And what's happening now is I'm bringing the proxy in, which is a low bit rate, and that's a very fast transfer. And I can literally go in here and say, mark in, mark out, and I'm making a little list over here of the elements that we're making those selections. And in a press conference of 30 minutes or so, it might be the person walking up to the podium, maybe saying a couple of sentences, and you're grabbing a minute or so of the content of that. Then you need the cutaways, you need a couple questions. So out of 30 minutes, in one long clip, you may only have 1.5 minutes of material to bring in. If you're under deadline, you're going to want to do that. And what this XD-Cam transfer software does is it lets me go and say, all right, I only want those 2 little elements and have them come into the system. What's happening now over here is it's importing clip number 1, and then it's going to import clip number 2. And I can literally just click on that, and those are the elements that we have. In my preferences, I've told it to give me an extra second on either side, called pad or handles, and I can tell that to be there so that it actually arrives in Final Cut Pro with those handles so that I could literally lasso a whole bunch of them, throw them in the timeline, and then throw a whole bunch of dissolves on it. And I'll show you a quick thing about that now. I'm going to Command Tab back over to the XD-Cam transfer software, and we're going to make a couple of subclips out of what's on the system. And let's say I know that I need to have a couple of these to work with, and I want to right-click and say Fetch the Proxy. So I'm literally bringing the proxies in now. There is a setting that you can always have the proxies come in as soon as the disk mounts. I have chosen not to do that because I'm visually oriented and I'm in a hurry and I want to be able to just grab the elements that I need. So now that those proxies are in, I may want to be able to say, okay, let's go and take, and it's going to give me a little cue here that says that the proxy is in. I want to have a little bit of this duck. I'm going to mark it in. I'm going to mark an out. I'm going to add that to my list. I need a little bit of this wider shot with the water, mark an in, mark an out, and we're going to add that. And we're going to grab a little bit of the tree here. And we'll do one more that's got a proxy, which is the wider shot of the ducks. And I'm literally making a list, and then I'm going to hold the Shift key and say import all subclips. What that's doing now is it's going out to the disk again. The disk has to be mounted, and it's pulling the high resolution, high definition, and it's delivering it into the Final Cut Pro browser window. So I've got a couple of the subclips are coming into the system, and they're showing up over here on the in the browser under the name column. So now what we're going to do is called a storyboard edit. And I know that we haven't gotten into any detail in the interface. We haven't described what any of the windows are, but you need to see this right away because it's like, oh, cool. So I'm going to go over, and right now we're in the list view. I'm going to switch that over to what's called the icon view. And I can do that with my right click, and I could say view as large icons. I could go up and pull down from it and tell it to do that. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to lay these out in the order that I think I want the shots to be. So I want that one to be my first shot, that to be my second, my third, my fourth, and then we're going to finish on the pretty flower. And you'll notice that I've done this in kind of a stair-step method because what's going to happen is when I drag this over to my canvas window, it's going to take it in order left to right, top to bottom. If this one was up here, this one would probably go second. And then it would go third, fourth, and fifth. We don't want that. I want it to be in this order. I lasso it by clicking and dragging. And now what I'm doing is I'm dragging it all the way across, and I'm going to drop it into my timeline effectively in insert or overwrite, but I can also add transition. So I'm going to drop it with a transition, and look what it does for me in the timeline. It does the fade up. It shows me the shot. It's now going to go and do a crossfade for me. It's doing a dissolve effectively. And I did the dissolve across all those transition points. So I've effectively cut my sequence with one keystroke. How cool is that? I don't need to learn any of the rest of the interface. Well, yeah, I do. We'll do that next. But how cool is that? So now that we've put a sequence together and I've been talking about what some of the windows are kind of in a cursory manner, I think it's time that we get into a little bit more detail what each one of the windows is. We've captured some material. We've actually transferred it off of XDCAM disk. So we have a couple of shots in what we call the browser. What the browser is, it's a way to organize your material. So the browser gives me a way of keeping my sequences, keeping my source clips. If I wanted to create folders and put a folder for narration, a folder for sound bites, for ease of use, to be able to find things, it's called the browser. There's a couple different ways to look at the browser. We can have large icons, we can have small icons, we can look at the list. So right now we're in the large icon mode. Because I know how to use right click, I can go in here and say, well, let's make them small icons. Kind of small for me to be able to see anybody, even somebody younger than 50 years old. So we can go in and we can look at the list. When I look at the list, I can sort by the name of the clip, I can sort by the duration, I can sort by the media start time, multiple ways to be able to organize myself in the browser. We also have some shortcuts up here, and what this is we refer to it commonly as the coffee bean. It's officially called the button bar, and when there isn't anything in there, it looks like a coffee bean. And for instance, as we go over here, this looks like a coffee bean. So that's why it's commonly referred to in the Final Cut Pro world as the coffee bean. So you can create and put some of your buttons up here that you use often. So if I want to look at the list view, I want to look at the frame view, I want to create a new sequence. Here's my large and small icon. It's a fast way to be able to do that. For editing, I can highlight a clip and I can double click on it, and it puts it into what's called the viewer window. The viewer is sometimes mistaken for a source monitor because of the paradigm of videotape editing where you have the source on the left and the record on the right. The viewer is so much more, and once I grasped what the viewer did, it was a very difficult thing for me to understand why that's not the source monitor. We'll get into that in a second. But what this does is it lets me see the entire clip that was brought in because I clicked on it. I can also drag the clip over and drop it into the viewer window, and then I have a nonlinear availability of going to the first frame or the last frame or going to the mark in or going to the middle, and I can drag through it. We can look at the source time code, we can look at the duration of the clip, we can look at a couple of different, there's a way to be able to jog and shuttle. I don't use jog and shuttle because those are very linear methods of being able to navigate. I just click where I want it to go. I click over here, I mark a new endpoint. If I wanted to mark an endpoint here using the mouse, it's an awfully small button for me to do that. Why not just use the I key, which is the shortcut key? Mark it out, and we're done. So there's my clip. If I wanted to edit that, we can use these three buttons over here in the canvas. And what the canvas is effectively my target. I edit from the viewer to the canvas. When we did that little storyboard edit before, we went from the browser straight to the canvas, bypassing the viewer. It's a shortcut. Final Cut Pro is notorious for having 3, 4, 5 ways to do things. What we want to try to focus on, what are the fastest ones to be able to work in order to be able to hit your deadline. So as we're working, I can go in here and I can click on a clip and bring it into the viewer. I can mark a new in and an out point on it, and I can hit one of these 3 buttons down here. One of them is called Insert, which effectively splices the sequence and opens it up. And that you'll see that the shortcut there is F9. Remember we changed the function keys before when we were first doing the Macintosh overview? Now, if I wanted to make that edit at that point, I can literally hit F9 and that shot goes into the timeline. If I wanted to bring another clip over and I just wanted to drag it from the browser and drop it into Insert or Overwrite, I could do it this way. And you'll see on the user interface underneath the canvas window, the red box lights up because it's going to perform an overwrite edit. Overwrite covers over what was there originally. Insert opens it up and extends the length of the piece. So we could lasso all of the 5 clips and we could drag them straight to the timeline and drop them in. So that's yet another way to edit. So wait a minute. You put the shot from the browser into the viewer and you marked a new in and out, and then you hit keyboard, yeah, or you dragged it over to the canvas window, yeah, or you dragged it to the timeline, yeah, any of those. And each one, you're going to feel it. You're going to know what it is that you're going to need to do to make that edit. Oh, geez, we need to dissolve into that because it's a jump cut. So you drag it over and you drop it in the one that says Insert with Transition. Very simple to do. So the 3 windows that are on the top of the screen, browser organizes the material. Viewer, in this case, when we're using source material, the viewer lets me mark new ins and outs, and it lets me organize myself so that I can bring it over and make the edit. The canvas is where I make the edit. There's a direct one-to-one relationship between canvas and timeline. So wherever I'm scrubbing through, underneath the frame in the canvas, you'll notice that the timeline is also following. Okay? I could also drag through the timeline as we go through. One thing to be very clear on, based on experience working with editors, they want to try to drag in the timeline, not in the time bar. So that's another one of those little things you want to go through. As long as you pick up the playhead, this is the playhead. We haven't discussed the timeline too much, but this is the playhead, and then I can drag however I want. Remember I said the canvas and the timeline are a one-to-one relationship. Once we get down into the timeline, we've got a couple different things. Over on the left side, in lowercase, we have V and 1, which is video and video track 1. And it's also showing me, when the tooltip comes up, it's telling me source. So lowercase means what's loaded in the viewer has those components, video A1 and A2. If I had a 4-track clip that came in, it would be V, A1, A2, A3, and A4. When I go across to the uppercase letters, that's my destination. So it's effectively a patch panel. So if I want V1 to go to V1, I just leave it the way it is. If I want A1 to go to A3, I drag it down, and now I've patched A1 source from the viewer. A1 source is going to A3 in the timeline. A2 is going to A4 in the timeline. So the timeline is effectively, on the left side is 0, and then it expands depending on how many clips are in the timeline and as to the duration of the piece. So as I go from left to right, I'm going later in the piece. What I want to show you now is what some of the editing in the timeline can be done. So we saw what a couple of the function keys did and the importance of those function keys in doing an insert or an overwrite edit. And over here in the timeline, there's a button here that allows me to toggle that snap on and off. And so this is the snapping button. You get a little tooltip that shows you that. What that does is it allows me to, effectively it has a little magnet that when I get closer to a transition point, it lets me snap to that transition point. And this is really good to know. One of the things that enhances it even better is the fact that if I don't want that to happen, all I have to do while I'm dragging, left hand is free here, is I hit the end key and it shuts it off. So I don't have snapping, so I can creep up on the transition without it snapping to it. And again, while I'm dragging, I can turn it back on again when I need it. Very different than a lot of other systems out there where you have to kind of let go, then you hit the key, then you grab it again. So this is really, really great. And the transition point that lights up when we're doing it, lights up across all 3 of them. So another one of the keyboard commands and another one of the very important functions within Final Cut is what's called link selection. Watch what happens when I do this. Link selection is off right now, and it's this key over here, and you'll see the little tooltip come on. Link selection is off. If I wanted to pick up this whole clip, I could click on it, and it only lit up the video track, whereas I have video A1 and A2. I want all of them to light up because I want to show you a really cool editing function called Shuffle Edit. So what we have here is I have this lighting up individual tracks, but I want to light them all up with one keystroke. That's when we go to linked selection. Shift L, which can be done pretty much if you move your left hand all the way over to the right hand side of the keyboard, you can toggle that on with Shift L. And when you turn that on, I click once and it lights up all three of the tracks that came in with it. So they're associated as if they're one clip. They are one clip, but each of the components of that clip are linked together, therefore linked selection. So the thing that is really cool, well, there's so many things that are really cool. When I click on it, it's like, well, geez, I don't want to do that, but I don't want to shut off link selection because for the most part I want it on. If you hold the Option key and you click on it, it gives you the opposite. So if link selection's on and you only want video or audio, you hold the Option key and it only lights the one up. So now Option key, left hand free, it lights up all of them. Conversely, if I shut off link selection and it doesn't light it up and it's like, oh geez, I need link selection on, but I only need it this one time. I only need it momentarily for a moment. For this one time, I hold the Option key and it lights up all of them. Okay, now we're going to get into what's called shuffle editing. Shuffle editing, we do want link selection on and we want snapping on because what we're going to do is we're going to rearrange some of these clips in the timeline. And I'm going to show you how to do this. You're going to use this a lot. Somebody's going to throw a script at you at the last minute that rearranges the wide shot with the close-up, and you're going to need to be able to do that rearrange quickly when you're cutting what's called a voiceover. So again, notice as I'm snapping to the transition point, it's opaque. It's blocking what the other shot is because it's kind of saying, hey, you're going to cover over those other shots. There's the arrow down. Now, right hand, Option key. I click on the Option key, and it now becomes transparent, and I get a little arrow that's curved, and I'm snapped to the transition, and it rearranges and bumps the rest of the clips down. So I want to rearrange another shot. Maybe I want to rearrange this one and drag this one in later in the piece, and I snap that to a transition point. I hold down the Option key, and it rearranges for me. This is shuffle editing. This is another one of the ways that you're going to be able to get done a whole lot faster when you're cutting just B-roll to be able to get it on the air. So we're going to use this a lot in the editing process, and you're going to need to time your shots so that they're going to fit the script. Somebody's going to present a script to you, or in many cases they're going to say, I need 20 seconds of the car crash on the freeway, and you're just going to go in and cut 20 seconds. But if they're going to be talking about specific things about, you know, something that's happened, you're going to want to be able to time those, and that's where we're going to get into what's called top and tail. Now that we have a bunch of shots in the timeline, we need to get them to time. In other words, somebody's going to have written a script, and you're going to need to be able to have the shots last long enough is the first goal, and then a little hidden goal of that is that the actual shots pertain to the words that were written. What a concept. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually start a new sequence, and we're going to grab a couple of new shots. I'm going to do pull down from the File menu to Sequence is one way to do it. And I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to grab those same 5 shots and drop them directly into the timeline. And you're going to see them drop in the order that they were numerically in the timeline, right? So I can drag through and we can see those 5 shots. So now we'll play it, and we're going to see that there's a couple seconds of each shot, but what we may need to do is to revise the duration of those shots, and that's called top and tail. What we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to trim these in a very quick way to be able to do it. So the first shot, it's about 3 seconds long, and we can look at the clock up here to see where we are in the piece. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. If I wanted this shot to start a little bit later, right here for instance, because of something that's happening, maybe the camera stabilizes a little bit, but I want it to start at that point, instead of me going back and marking an in point and then playing it down to where I want it to end and then taking it out, I'm literally playing it in the timeline and parking it, and we're going to use a couple of the keyboard commands you're going to need to know in order to be able to make it happen quickly. So the X key, this is one of those ones that you need to know. The X key marks the in and the out on the clip where you're parked, where the playhead is parked. Now, because the playhead is sitting where I want the shot to end, I'm going to use the O key. I've now marked the area I don't want in the sequence. Completely opposite what you would expect, right? Instead of marking the areas that I do want, I'm marking the area I don't want, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that out and do effectively a ripple edit. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the Shift-Delete key. When I'm on a laptop, it has to be the Shift-Delete key. When I'm an extended keyboard, I would use the Delete key that's over the arrows. And what that does is it immediately takes it out and it does a pull-up of the sequence. Let me show you what happens if we did it the other way. If I only hit the regular delete key as part of the standard keyboard, it's going to lift out the area that I don't want. So let's go back and we'll do it again with the regular delete key on the extended keyboard, which then does the pull-up for me. Then I can play down to where the shot ends or where I want it to end. Maybe I want this shot to end right here. So instead of me marking it in and going to the end point, marking it out and taking it out, I'm literally going to go X. I'm going to mark a new end point. I've now identified the area that I want to lose, and I'm going to hit the delete key and it does my pull-up. That's top and tail. So let's look at it from this point of view. You have a painter with a brand new canvas. You have a sculptor with a brand new piece of granite. I'm the sculptor. I throw everything into the timeline and then I scrape it down till I have my pietà or whatever I'm doing. Whereas a painter is going to take the shots and put them into the viewer and carefully mark, or gingerly as I refer to it, gingerly marking an in and an out point and dropping that in the timeline. This way it's easier for me to physically go in and sculpt out the bits I don't want than it is for me to carefully place the shots the way that I would do it using the viewer. So we've brought in the rest of the clips off of the XD-Cam disc, so we have a little bit more material to work with and cut a little bit more liberally than 3-second and 4-second shots. I'm going to create a new sequence. I'm going to right-click and say New Sequence, or if I wanted, I could say Command-N. It creates a new sequence. We'll double-click on it. You'll see that my timeline then becomes new. I'm going to right-click again, and I'm going to say, out of the right-click, I want to see View as Large Icons. So this is effectively the thumbnail, the head frame of each one of the shots that was on the XD-Cam disc. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make just a little quick storyboard. Now again, these clips are going to be a little bit longer than the ones that we had before. And I'm just going to lasso a bunch of these and drop them in the timeline. So we're going to have a little bit more to edit with. And what I want to do is just to reinforce the top and tail thing so that you learn what the commands are. Now you'll notice I grabbed 7 shots, but I only see 2.5 in the timeline. First thing you do, you click in the timeline, you hit Shift-Z. So Shift-Z effectively shows me 100% of what's in the timeline, and that's what it just did. Instead of zooming in and zooming out, Shift-Z is a shortcut to be able to bring it back effectively to home. All right? So we're going to click, we're going to go through here, we're going to find where this shot stabilizes. I'm going to hit X, O, and delete. And what that does is it now makes that the first frame. So I want you to memorize XO delete and XI delete. So this one we're going to pick up with here, and then we're going to drag it till he goes out of frame. I'm going to say XO delete again. We're going to play down to here. As he goes out of frame, XI delete. So effectively I'm going through the piece, and I'm picking new ins and outs. So if I'm at this point with an XO delete, and I know I'm going to trim the next one, there's no sense in doing it exactly the same way. Maybe I want to mark an in, go down here to where I want the next shot to begin. When I finally figure out how to focus the shot, I mark an out. So now I've isolated both of those edit points just to trim it down to time. Now my time clock is over here, 1:00:27. I may be cutting a voiceover very quickly, and I need to cut 40 seconds of VO. So we're going to literally go down here and put a couple of these shots together. We'll have, maybe we don't want that shot at all. I highlight it because I have link selection on. I click on one of them, it's highlighted, and I hit the delete key and it does the pull-up for me because I didn't like that shot. I grabbed it when I did like it. I don't like it anymore. I want this shot to start here, XO delete, and I go down here where I want it to end, and I say XI delete. And this is imperative to learn this. So in cutting a voiceover, I'm cutting across all the tracks. When I'm cutting a package, I have to be really careful. I don't want to ever do this when I'm putting B-roll over a piece of narration. I would only use it when I'm cutting sound bites in the timeline, or when anything that's sound full as a sound bite or a stand-up. That's the only time I would use top and tail when I'm cutting a package. So now we're going to go here. We're going to trim this when we're looking at the boathouse. And actually, let's just lose that whole shot. And then we have this person coming and going out of frame. So I've got my 40-second VO. Maybe the audio levels, maybe we need to adjust those. Not sure, but let's listen to it and see what we've got. So I have a little bit of sound in the background. If I wanted to adjust the audio levels in the timeline, I would turn on what's called the clip overlay, and that's this down here, which is Option W. And what that does in the timeline is it puts a little red bar effectively at 0 dB. Now I can pick it up and I can adjust that audio level on each of the tracks, and I can bring the level up or down by just grabbing it. If we wanted to zoom in on the timeline, I could zoom in using the scaling buttons here, right? Which could also be Shift T, so I can cycle through with Shift T. So if I wanted a little bit more granularity as I'm adjusting the audio levels, I would do this. Okay? So this is adjusting the audio levels on each of the tracks. It's a very fast way to be able to do it, but it is indeed affecting the entire level of that clip from the first frame to the last frame of what's in the timeline. Now if I wanted to have it ramp up and ramp down within the same clip, very simple thing to do. So what we need to learn real quick are some of the things in the tool palette, because these are things that you're going to need to know. The tool palette's all the way over on the right-hand side. The arrow is called the selection tool. So the A key on the keyboard toggles the selection tool from whatever state it was in before. A effectively brings you back to what's called the selection tool and gives you the ability to click on a clip, click over here in the timeline and drag through it without trimming, without cutting the clip in different pieces. You're going to want to come back to the A key after you've done one of the other buttons. So I'm going to skip over these two keys and we're going to go over here to what's called the ripple tool. And when we click on the little triangle, we're going to see that there are two icons. So this one here is the roll tool, which is the R key. And when we go over here and we click on it and it makes it different, it's called the ripple tool. So A is the selection tool, R is roll, RR is ripple. What's the difference between a roll and a ripple? Roll is non-destructive in the total time of the piece. Ripple extends or shortens the sequence and affects the total time of the piece. So what that's doing is it's doing a pull-up. So if I just wanted to move a transition point, I would use the roll tool to do that. So I'm going to hit the R key once, I click on a transition point, and you know what? I have link selection on. I only want the video to go. I'm going to shut off link selection, Shift L, if I wanted to use the keyboard. And you'll see that it just lights up that transition, and I can pick that up, and I have snapping on, so it's not really letting me get out of there. Well, it did that time. So now I've extended the outgoing shot a second 15 frames, and what that's done is it's given me a split edit. I may not need to do that in a voiceover. I would do that in a package, but it's a fundamental that you need to learn. So the A key brings me back to the selection tool so that then I could click around in the timeline and do what I need to. R puts me into the roll mode. Essential thing to know. Pick it up, move it. If I wanted to shut off the snapping tool, it then lets me grab a little bit in either direction, right? So it doesn't have that gravity to pull me back to the transition point. Now, if I wanted to, I could go in and hit the RR key, and what that's going to do is it's going to put me into the ripple mode. Now, am I going to be trimming the outgoing side of the transition or the incoming side? And that depends on where you click, and which also depends which direction the little leader is pointing to. So right now I've got the incoming side of the clip is what's highlighted. If I wanted to toggle that without having to be very careful in the timeline, the U key lets me toggle among the outgoing, center cut, and incoming of the transition. So if I wanted to shorten this clip, and I do want to add the transition point, so we're going to turn link selection back on again. We want to do a pull-up on this. I click on the outgoing side, and I'm shortening it. So now that's doing a pull-up. So this is kind of similar to top and tail, but if I'm listening to the audio and I'm watching the picture, I have to be really careful when I do it this way. Whereas in the other way, I'm playing it down, I know exactly based on the sound, based on the picture, I need it to end here, top and tail, or top here, tail there. So the ripple tool lets me make those decisions. Maybe I want to extend the incoming shot. So now I've bumped down the sequence, whatever the number of frames were in the little helper that shows up. So R for roll, non-destructive, moves a transition point. R for ripple lets me lengthen or shorten whatever that transition is on the outgoing or the incoming side. As we travel down in the tools over here, the next one is the slip and slide tool. Slip and slide allows me to take the edited shot, whether it's, let's say for instance, 7 seconds and 14 frames, but you know what? It needs to start a little bit later, but I need it to be the same duration in respect of the sequence. So what slip does, for instance, if this is the window of the sequence, and this is the whole clip that I've taken in my original edit, is literally 7 seconds and 14 from there, but from your perspective, if I need to start it a little later, slip lets me grab it and slide it and keep that same 7 seconds and 14 frames. This is a great way to be able to just quickly fine-tune the edit. The slip literally takes the shot earlier or later, effectively trimming the incoming and the outgoing point of that particular shot. What slide does, which is the SS key, what slide does is it takes those 7:14 and it slides the shot earlier or later in the sequence. Okay? So this is really, really good to know if you're cutting music videos and you miss the beat by a fraction of a second. What you're literally doing is you're picking up the 714, good example, the 714 shot, and sliding it 6 frames earlier. So I've effectively cut 6 frames off the outgoing shot leading into that, but I'm also starting the incoming shot after it 6 frames earlier, the same amount. I'm effectively doing 2 trims at the same time. So S is for slip, SS is for slide. We're going to navigate down one more button here. We're going to go to the blade tool. What does the blade tool do? Well, the blade tool lets me cut in the middle of a sequence. Cut in the middle of a shot, and it breaks it into 2 pieces. And it gives me 2 triangles that are pointing to each other that tell me that I've got a continuous edit there, that the frame that I've edited on the outgoing side is followed by the actual frame that was shot as the incoming. So that allows me, if I wanted to, I could highlight that clip. Oh, geez, I just cut it again when I wanted to do the selection tool. This is the importance of the A key. So I'm going to undo. I'm going to hit the A key to go back to selection tool to highlight the clip, and I'm going to hit the delete button. And so that's another way to be able to do a top and tail. It's a couple extra steps. So as we navigate through, what we want to make sure that we do is if we turn the blade tool on to be able to do the cut, that after we do the cut, we shut it off again. So we turn the blade tool on, B key for blade tool. I cut it. I go back to the A selection tool, and if I wanted to pick this up and maybe make it do a little rearrange edit where we're doing a shuffle edit to take that first part of it, that's a very good way to do an edit. We navigate farther down, we get the zoom tool, the Z key. I don't use it. One of the reasons for the zoom tool is you forget you're in the zoom tool and it keeps zooming. You have to go back to the A key. So what I typically do, and again, there's multiple ways to do this. Let me show you. So if I hit the Z key, it's going to zoom in. Every time I click, it's going to keep zooming in. If I hold the Option key, it zooms out again. I don't want that, right? So what I want to do is I want to be able to go back, and we're going to zoom back in again because we can, right? So I'm here in the zoom key. Now I have to go back to the A key to go back and navigate through my timeline. What I do is I do Command plus to zoom in, Command minus, and my selection tool is still active. So I don't have to switch out of it or remember to switch out of it when I'm clicking around on the timeline. So the next one that I do is the pen tool, which is the P key. And what the pen tool allows me to do is effectively when I click on the pen tool, it allows me to put keyframes into the audio. And we don't have to have it active to do that. So I'm putting keyframes in the audio, and what I'm doing here is if I wanted to, I could literally pick that up and tell the audio to fade down. Maybe I want it to fade down here, and I want it to fade back up again all the way. So this is a way to do keyframing. So the pen tool lets you keyframe audio. It also lets you keyframe video if you're doing motion effects, you're doing some animations with picture-in-picture and so forth. So the pen key is vital. Learn those steps. A for selection, R for roll, RR for ripple, S for slip, SS for slide, B for blade, and P for pen. So those are the things that you need on the tool palette. And after a while, you're not going to navigate your mouse all the way over to the right-hand side to be able to activate it. It'll just be second nature. And as you start working, you're going to find your right hand on the mouse. Your left hand is going to go across the whole keyboard. You're going to do things like the A key, the N key for snapping, the Shift L for link selection, I and O for mark in, mark out, X for marking the whole clip. And then you're going to start doing some cool navigation tricks like J, K, and L. L lets me play it forward at regular speed. If I hit L again, it goes at double speed. I hit L again, it goes faster, and it lets me hear audio. Now, if I hit the J key, J goes backwards at regular speed, double speed, and faster when we're going backwards. Very cool. So, how do I go really slowly? If I want to stop, I can hit the K key to stop it in those modes. That stops it. But I can go J and L, backwards and forwards. Maybe that's over a soundbite as I'm trying to get closer to my edit. If I was to hold the K key and the L key, it's actually playing at 8 frames per second, which is about a third of regular speed, but it's letting me hear analog audio. So this is the audio that's on there. KJ lets me, actually I was playing it backwards on my voice. KJ lets me go backwards at a third speed. KL lets me go forwards at a third speed. And then I can still go back and hit the L key. Most people that I know actually use the space bar, J, K, and L to navigate through clips, and then they jump up to F9 and F10 to do the edits. They jump back down again. And they're using the mouse just to be able to toggle, grab a new shot, drop it in, whatever they need to do. So another couple that you need to know are the up and the down arrows when you're on the extended keyboard, and they're the little tiny keys that are on the laptop. The up and the down arrows, up takes me to the previous transition, down takes me to the next transition. And what you're going to find is you're going to be using, and believe me, years and years of experience, as you become one with the keyboard, you're never going to want to leave it. And you know, coming out of CMX and Grass Valley, various other types of editors where it's very keyboard driven, literally the only way to control the decks back in the videotape world was to use the keyboard. And then you start going, well, hey, this mouse is pretty cool. I can move things back and forth across from one browser over to the viewer. If I have two displays, I can go from one screen to the other. Ooh, right? But the beauty of it is that I use both, and you're going to find yourself using both. You may create your own shortcuts to be able to navigate through here. Maybe you tell a couple of keyboard commands to happen on the mouse that you use often. You can get a little Contour Shuttle Pro, and you can map those to certain functions so you can shuttle through it. For me, shuttling is so 90s. It's so tape. I want to be able to click immediately to those particular points. So that's an overview of the tool palette. It's kind of the synopsis of what you need to know from the keyboard. I'm sure we're going to come up to a couple others, but I just wanted to show you that this is the way to cut a voiceover and the way to be able to adjust basic audio levels. We haven't done any crossfades. We haven't done any dissolves. We're going to do that when we get to the package.